Okay. Thanks, Rob, and welcome everybody to the fourth dimension Big Book study on the Big Book Compendium. As we were just saying, Kevin's away today and asked me to facilitate for him, so you're stuck with me for the next hour. Um, as uh, as you know, we like to first start off with the set aside prayer. I like the set aside prayer for a big book study in particular because it reminds me I have an awful lot to learn still, and the only thing that will stop me from doing that is believing that I know everything there is to know. So I need to know and understand that things I believed my whole life I'm completely wrong about. So the set aside prayer goes like this: God, today help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about others, and everything I think I know about my own recovery, so that I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me see the truth. Amen. Also, the tradition with the fourth dimension big book study is we like to start off reading the two places in the book that actually talk about the fourth dimension or mention the fourth dimension. The first one is on page 8, and it says, "I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes." And the second place is on page 25, where it says, "We have found much of heaven and we have been rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed." Right. And so those are the two places. Um, so jumping right in, as you know, we've been spent the last few weeks going through step 4. And we'll finish that off today with sex conduct, and we'll probably also get through the fifth step today as well. So I always like to ask if there's any questions or comments about what we did last week and going through the fourth step. And last week we covered fears, right? So when we cover resentments are all things in my past. Fears are all things in my future, things that haven't happened yet, but that I'm afraid I'm going to lose something I've got. I'm not going to get something I want. I'm going to get found out about something, that kind of thing. So yes, Shiva, good to see you, man. I'm away from
Hi,
mic,
Shiva
so
alcoholic.
hey,
Can we
Shiva.
just quickly go through the fear prayer, please?
The fear prayer, sure. So the fear prayer, um, let me find it here. It's on page on the bottom of page 68, I think. It says, just let me find it here. It's near the bottom. Perhaps there's where do we think so?
It is 63.
Oh,
68, sorry,
yeah,
68.
68. I'm just trying to find it at the bottom, but basically it says, uh,
Third paragraph.
where are we at here?
So we ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be.
Exactly. So what are you curious about it, right? So dear God, please remove my fear of blank, financial insecurity, right? Why do I have it? I have this fear because I'm afraid I'll lose my job. Please show me what you would have me be, right? What can I do for something else? What is it you would like me to do? When I have a fear or when I don't have the answer to the question, there's this wonderful guy who I always say when he speaks, I hear him with my heart. His name's Scott L.
Mm.
from Nashville, Tennessee. And Scott will say, when I don't, when I don't know the answer to the question, when I'm dealing with a fear that I can't get rid of, it's because I'm not answering the right question or asking the right question, right? So let's say I have this big fear that I can't shake and I can't get rid of, and let's just use financial insecurity. What would you have me be? How do I deal with this fear? There's a couple different ways. The first way is, I have this fear, let's say, of not having enough money to retire someday, right? So what can I do about that fear? How do I deal with that? That's like trying to swallow the elephant all in one meal, right? But if I say, what can I do about this fear today? What can I do about my financial insecurity today? right? Maybe it's I don't buy the $9 Starbucks coffee. Maybe I get the $2 Tim Hortons coffee, right? Maybe it's I don't go out for a fancy steak dinner and I cook at home. It's what can I do about that fear today, right? How do I deal with it today? Does that help? There's one other thing
Thank
that
you.
Scott says that if I can't deal with these fears, these really big fears, another solution is, what would the very, very, very worst outcome be for me if I was, if I have a fear of financial insecurity, right? So what would that look like to me? It might be I lose my job, so I lose income, I lose I lose my house, my car, I lose all these things, right? And I'll tell you the biggest part of that, it's not even all the things I lose. The biggest part to me would be my ex-wife finds out about it, and then she gets to
Okay.
giggle and laugh and point fingers at me and enjoy herself immensely because she finds out about it. And so let's say that's my biggest fear, right? And I can't shake this fear, and I've done all the things that we've talked about, and I can't get rid of it. So this part is key, and be very careful about understanding what I say here. I pray to God to relieve me of the fear of that worst case scenario happening. I pray to God for me to accept that possibility. I don't pray to God for that to happen. I just pray to God that I come to accept that if that's what happens, I'll be okay, right? And so if I come to terms with the fact that if that were to happen, and I would be okay, and I would, life would go on, and it would be God's plan for me to have to figure out life from that point. If I can come to accept that as a possible income, the fear goes away. And then guess what else happens? If the very, very worst case scenario that I could imagine doesn't happen, I win. No matter what else happens, I win, right? I come out ahead because my worst case fear and scenario it didn't materialize, right? And so in that case, then I come out ahead. So to me, that's what, when I'm asking God, what would you have me be? Well, God would have me be of love and service, right? But what does that mean, right? I don't, that sounds great. Be of love and service, right? But what does that mean, right? It's like, so what am I doing to fit myself to be of most use to my fellow man, right? And so I have to shake these fears, right? I've got to deal with them, and in a lot of cases, that comes by actually working with others or helping others or doing something for somebody else, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Does that help? I hope I
Yeah.
answered your question.
Yes, he did quite elaborately. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have anything they want to go over or talk about? I don't know if I could see everybody. No? Okay, well, today we are going to be kick off on page 68, actually. So we've covered fears, we've covered and before that we covered resentments. Today we're going to cover sex conduct. So we're on near the bottom of page 68. It says now about sex. Many of us needed an over. Oh well, and actually remember going back, to the very beginning. It said that, on the very beginning of step 4. I just like to point out that it says, we have these instincts that we're born with, and in alcoholics we tend to overdo it with things, including our perceived need of these different instincts, right? And so when things don't go well, it manifests itself in these 3 ways, and that's why we deal with resentments, fears, and sex conduct, because that's really, really how these things have manifested themselves over time with alcoholics, right? So now we're going to talk about sex conduct. The other thing, and actually, I remember the very day in this book study when Kevin pointed this out, and I never really had gotten that before. But when it gets to sex conduct, Kevin says, if this was the story. So let's say we're in a mall and we're working on my 4th step, and we're in the food court and we sit down and well, let's talk about resentments, right? And we talk about resentments, and we don't really care if people are coming and going. And then it's like, well, let's talk about fear, and we talk about our fears, and we go through all that, and we don't really care. And then we get to this part, and why do we need to talk about our sex conduct? Because what would happen in that crowded mall, right? Okay, well, now let's talk about our sex conduct. And it's where we have most of our shame, right? Almost 100% of the time when somebody withholds something in their fifth step that they don't want to talk about, not 100% of the time, but 80, 90% of the time, it has to do with sex conduct. And it's where we have, these all this shame, right? And until we're willing to expose these things and share them and deal with them, we walk around with this guilt and shame, right? And we carry this guilt with us everywhere we go. So I think that's why it's important that we talk about it. I can remember in the early days reading this chapter, everyone being a little bit apprehensive about reading this portion of the chapter and stuff. But it's just, it's one of the biggest parts of things that many of us need to deal with in our lives, right? So now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinion running to extremes, absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry for sex, or cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a basic necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or it isn't the right kind, right? So really, we're talking about, in this world we have, and when it comes to sex conduct, we're talking about, and we're going to have a couple of examples, but basically two extremes, right? On one hand, the one extreme might be that sex is strictly for procreation, so the human race can carry on, right? And on the other hand, we need sex and more sex and sex, and that says, some people think we don't get enough sex or not the right kind of sex, right? And so, the two extremes are all or just basically procreation, right? So one school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet, right? So back in the old days, a menu in a restaurant was presenting the fare of the restaurant. It was the fare, that was what they would call all of the choices on the menu. What were they offering, right? And it's the fare. So they're saying on one hand, we might have a very bland, no flavor diet, right? On the opposite hand, straight pepper, very spicy, right? So very, very bland or very, very spicy sex life. So they're just again reiterating the two, in another way, the two different extremes that we're talking about here. So we want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct, right? As a sponsor, it's not my job to tell you what your sex life should look like, right? And what your conduct should be, right? It's not up to me. We don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past, right? And so here it's going to give us sort of the four columns. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What could we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. So in that paragraph right there, it gave us our four columns. It's a little bit tricky in that it gave them to us slightly out of order, right? So it says we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. This is column 2. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate, right? Column 1 is whom did we hurt? Column 3 is did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And column 4 was had we been at fault? What should we have done instead? We got it all down on paper, right? So same thing, like we've talked about with step 4 in the other two portions, right? We have our piece of paper, with cut in half, and then our 3 columns on the top, and the bottom is our 4th column, right? And so same thing, I go through and I write down all the people that were intimate relationships in my past, right? So column 1, I just start writing down the people. Invariably, whoever I'm going through the steps with, will say to me, what if I can't remember their name or I don't know their name, right? That's okay. You don't have to know their name. I had when I was 19, I was traveling all over Alberta working for an oil field service company. And there's somebody on my list that I never did know her name. And I don't even remember what town it was in, but it was somewhere in central Alberta. I know that. But every night I was somewhere different. But I know exactly who she is. In my mind, I know who she is, and I know how badly I treated her and how unfairly I was to her and how inconsiderate I was, right? So you don't need to know somebody's name. You don't have, it's you just need to be able to describe them on in that first column, right? Does that make sense to everyone? I just need to get them down, right? So then I go through and I do that. And then I go through and you know, then I subject it to these questions, right? Where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? And where had I been inconsiderate? Right? So how did I do that? How was I selfish? How was I inconsiderate? How was I only thinking of me, right? For me, I don't know about everybody else, but this one is the most straightforward for me. Like it's the sex conduct one is I have the least confusion about usually in my life. So I go through and I ask those questions and I answer those in column 2, right? And then in column 3, I go through and I said, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And here's the newest news to me about this one. I would go through that and I would go, how did I arouse jealousy for that person? How did I arouse suspicion for that person? And how did I arouse bitterness for that person? And I only thought of it in the way of, how was I doing that to them? But guess what else I do? I do it to me. They don't do it to me. I do it to me, right? So I start to see things that aren't happening, right? How I get jealous because I will oh uh she did, she went to see her friends without me, right? And so I get jealous. Or I don't know what she's doing, whatever it is, I can read into the situation and arouse jealousy, bitterness, and suspicion in myself, right? So I can damage my relationships with the people I love um, by making stuff up in my head, right? By reading things into a situation that don't exist. And it's really because it's just not trusting God, right? It's not trusting God. I think that what if I lose her, right? Well, if I lose her, that was the plan all along, right? It was God's plan. So um it's just been the last few years where I understood that I have to look at those things not only in how am I creating them for the other person, but how might I be creating those for myself as well, right? Does that make sense to everyone? That like I feel like I didn't explain that very good, but that's I could it's not just me raising those things in the other person, it's me raising them in myself, right? And then in the fourth column, it's where were we at fault? What should I have done instead, right? And so, how is this my fault? What did I do wrong? What's going on with my behavior, and then what should I have done differently? What could I have done differently to not do this, right? And we get this all down on paper, right? So then it says, now I've done all this, I've gone through and I'm looking at this, and some things might become very apparent, and I can see how I might not have been the most upstanding person in a relationship, right? So what's the objective of that? We want to form a new sex ideal, which just means what's important in an intimate relationship with a partner for me, um, and how am I going to try and change the way these relationships have gone in the past, right? So how am I going to try and change, and what's this ideal going to be? And for the longest time, having a sex ideal was a foreign concept to me. I didn't know that that was in this book, right? Until we started studying it and until I got a sponsor that actually understood a whole lot more about the book than I did. And so it says, in this so we reviewed our, in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and to help us live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly nor selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Right? So it says we ask God. What does Kevin say when we ask God? That means it's a prayer, right? So we pray. Dear God, please help me form and shape my sex ideals. What would it mean to be in an intimate relationship for me, right? And so we'll go through and spend some time, and I believe that we should write it down because it's just easier for me to remember things once I've written them down. Another big clue is if you ask your sponsee what their sex ideal is and they can't tell you, it's because they don't have one, right? So I like to make sure that I have mine. I think about it fairly often, right? um I'm in a relationship, so when I'm frustrated, angry, restless, irritable, discontented, what's going on with me, I'm most likely raising suspicion, jealousy, within myself, right? How does that fit with my sex ideal, right? And so my sex ideal, it's pretty simple, but it's just to be in a loving, caring, monogamous relationship, that where I'm completely honest about what's going on with me, not having any secrets, not hiding anything, those kinds of things, right? I've seen some very different sex ideals, and I sponsored a guy for a long time that couldn't stay sober, and his sex ideal was very far out there. And you're going to see that, he believed because him and his partner both thought it was okay to be in an open relationship, that would be okay, and neither one of them could stay sober for the life of them when that was part of it, right? So, but again, we're not to be the arbiter of anybody's sex conduct. So, I would just be, well, I don't know about that, but it's your sex idea, so let's see how it goes, right? So we try to shape this sane and sound ideal sex ideal. We're looking at all these past relationships. Had I been selfish, how did that go? And so on, right? So the other part I really like to talk about here that I think is really, really important, that went way over my head for a long time as well, was at the end of that paragraph. It says, we remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed, right? Sex powers are God-given, right? You know, it neither to be despised, right? And for some reason in my head, I always think of Catholic kids, but it's unfair. But what do we teach our children? Oh, you don't want to know about sex. No, sex is bad. Don't know about it. So too many kids grow up thinking sex is bad, evil, dirty, those types of things, right? But it's also neither to be used lightly, right? So what does that mean? Well, when I have somebody on my list that I don't know what their name was or what town they're from, I probably shouldn't have been doing the most intimate thing you can do with another human being, right? That's using it pretty lightly, I would say, right? So we have this sane sex ideal, that sane and makes sense to us. Um, but sex is a big deal. It's a very intimate act between two people that agree to do it. And so I think it's really cool that our book points out that it's this God-given thing that we have in our lives, but we shouldn't take it lightly. But it's also not something that we should loathe or think of in a dirty or negative way, right? Because it's God-given. It was intended for us to have. So whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. Um, in our in my, Kevin's my sponsor, as you all know, but in our lineage of sponsorship, we start from a position that these are amends that you can't make, right? Because they're very tricky amends to make without creating more harm in a lot of cases. So we start from that starting point. Now, that's not to say that none of those amends can ever be made, right? But there's some of the most tricky amends you could ever make. I would highly recommend, before making an amend in this area, that you review it and go over it in depth and detail with your sponsor, to make sure that we're not creating more harm. Right? Because this is an area where, especially in recent and fresh relationships, or breakups, it can be very difficult, and you could create an awful lot of harm. I'm going to give you another example. When I was 19, let's say, ish, I dated this wonderful girl for a year, right? She was a beautiful, wonderful person, and I treated her horribly bad. And then at some point, I decided I didn't want to be in the relationship, so I did what I always do. And because I'm not brave and don't have enough courage to be a man and end a relationship, I just start a new one, and eventually you find out and you end it. So that was always my strategy. And so, anyways, I end this relationship. So, let's say I was 20. I'm not, like, 40 years ago almost, right? So does she want me showing up? By all accounts, the last I heard anything about her was probably 20 years ago, and she had, you know, happily married for many years, kids, grandkids, all of that, right? So does she want me popping up in her life to make amends for how I treated her almost 40 years ago? And just injecting myself into her family. She's got a husband, kids, all of that. Does she really want me showing up in her life? She hasn't thought about me in decades, right? And so now, to make myself feel better, and to me make amends, does she really need me injecting myself into her life? Probably not, right? It might not create any harm, but it might, right? Because she's been happily married all these years. So, um, I just think in general, these amends are really tricky, and that we should never ever think that we should just be off making them without getting someone else's perspective on them, to help make sure that I'm seeing, that I'm seeing, not with my tunnel vision, but I'm seeing the whole picture, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. Okay. So, whatever our ideal turns out to be, we read that part around. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with other persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice, right? So, I'm going to go through, I'm going to do my sex inventory. I'm going to come up with my sex ideal, and then I need to share it with somebody, right? And I'm going to share it with them, not for them to say to critique it or tell me how it needs to change or to change my mind about it, but for them, just to review it with me. Again, I always say, I see, when I'm emotionally attached to something, it's like this: I've got the blinders on, right? You and I can have the exact same problem. You come to me and I can see other solutions for you, but when I have the problem, I just have this tunnel vision, and I see what I think is the truth, but often it's my truth. And so that's why I need to run things past somebody else. So we're going to run this past somebody else, but we're, if we start getting way out there, the two extremes we talked about, with the no flavor for our fare or the straight pepper diet, we're going to be wary of that, right? We're not looking for fanatical type advice, right? So we avoid hysterical thinking or advice. So now I've got this sex ideal, and I'm going through life, and it says, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on us and on our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done, and we have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, forgiven, and we'll have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are the facts out of our experience, right? So, like anything, in our book, one of the things that I think is the most helpful is that we have that first step where we have to 100% um, um, exercise that step. But the rest of the steps, I'm going to make mistakes, right? So here it's saying if I make a mistake and I have exhibit some past behaviors, am I going to drink? Not necessarily, right? As long as I realize I made the mistake, and I truly try to change my behavior and I try to do better, I'm not going to drink. The problem is if I just keep doing it over and over again, I'm not really trying to change anymore, right? And then I'm going to probably drink for sure, right? And it says, this is we're not making this up. This is what we've seen. When they wrote this, it says we're not theorizing, we're not making this up. It's not just something we believe or think. It says these are the facts out of our experience. So this is what's happened over and over again. The first 100 people that wrote this book, this is our experience. This is how it's gone. So it says to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal. Our guidance in each questionable, or for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache, right? So if I'm struggling with it, again, what does our book say over and over again in every single chapter? Nothing works so much to help me is if I'm helping someone else, right? If I'm working with a newcomer. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct, and we are willing to straighten up the past if we can. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. If you have already made a decision, right, in the third step, right, if I've made a decision to turn my will and my life over the care of God as I understand them, and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, right, which came up in step 4, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself, right? So, we go through and we follow the directions and do our 4th step, and it says, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. For the very first time when I finished my 4th step, I understood a little bit more about me, right? Not once had I ever tried to look inward and understand anything about me. I finished my 4th step and I phoned my girlfriend and I was like, you'll never guess what? I'm a selfish, self-seeking son of a bitch, right? And she's like, there's no right answer to that. Like she says, I can't agree with you and I can't disagree with you. So her answer was, you should phone your sponsor and talk to him about it, right? But it's the very first time, that I ever learned anything new or really about myself, right? So, yeah, our just I was just trying to remember. So I used to have written at the bottom of my last book that I wore out. I haven't written it in this one, but so resentments are my incorrect thinking, right? It's my incorrect thoughts about something. It's me incorrectly believing something, right? My fears are my incorrect beliefs. It's me believing things that are incorrect, right? I'm believing things that haven't ever happened. That same Scott guy, Scott Lee, says, I have wasted more time in my life clearing away the wreckage of my future than is probably necessary, right? That wreckage isn't even here yet, but I spend so much time worrying about my fears. So it's incorrect thoughts, right? And my bad sex conduct is incorrect behavior. It's bad behavior, right? So it's incorrect thoughts, incorrect beliefs, and incorrect behavior, incorrect actions, poor behavior, right? And those are really kind of the 3 areas that we've covered off. So that's it for step 4. Anybody want to any questions, comments about it before we get started on step 5? Anybody have any questions?
Karen, you have a question? Oh, sorry, Ben.
I was wondering if this, like, what people think, or like, I guess whoever thoughts, just like a brainstorm. Does this like really apply for, let's say, your wife? Because we're talking about the sex inventory, but
Mhm.
your eye can wander as an addict because you can easily become addicted to other things like gambling, gaming, anything really.
Right.
So let's say you're in a marriage and you're just like, I don't know, for me, um, like I'll contribute just a little bit. It's not to have that wandering eye. That is where it all starts out. I
This is
might see someone like in the corner of my eye, but I'm not gonna look. I'm gonna maintain eye. It might be in my peripherals,
Yeah.
but it just doesn't matter. Oh, she's beautiful, but I'm not gonna look. And that starts the process for me of being honest.
Yeah. So, I guess is the question, does your wife belong on your inventory, on your sex conduct inventory? Or should you be honest with her that you saw a beautiful woman?
Well, I didn't see her
Right.
because
So,
I didn't make I don't look, and I'm autistic, so I
right,
also don't actually like eye contact or anything like that.
right.
I don't like the energy because there's energy in the eyes
Yeah.
wherever you look.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, when you're doing your fourth step, you're like it's any person that you've been in an intimate relationship with will be on your fourth step, right? And so, as far as my girlfriend will see, she'll be like, "You're looking at that girl," right? And I'd be like, "I'm busted. I'm sorry," right? Like it's just, but I wouldn't say that every time you see an attractive someone that you find attractive that you run home and you tell your wife about it, right? Like but in in your sex ideal, how does that fit into your sex ideal, right? And because I'm striving towards this thing where for me, I want to be in a monogamous intimate relationship where I direct all of my sexual energy towards my partner that I'm in the relationship with, right? And so if I'm seeing somebody out of the corner of my eye that I find attractive, then I want to avoid that, like you're saying, and direct all of that attention to my wife or to my partner.
Yeah, I think for me, it's sort of a dismissive behavior. And I think that's what this is getting at is if you do have a long laundry list, I'll call it, of partners, then I think that suits those people, but I just don't fit in there because I'm solely focused on my wife. So that was my question. Thanks for
Yeah.
like
And
sharing.
to me, that's a big part of my sex ideal, right? Is that all of that energy goes in that direction, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, awesome. Thanks, Ben. Karen, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want, and now it's down. Did you want to
Yeah,
ask?
you know what? Rob took care of it for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it was done. Yeah. Thank you. But thank you for checking.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Well, let's move on. Chapter 5, into action, right? So we're going to talk about the fifth step here in the first part of this chapter. So having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory, right? So we've gone through and we've done our fourth step, and really we're looking for our defects of character, our shortcomings, our wrongs, those things is what we're looking for, right? Now, these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects, right? We admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, right? And I remember being at this part and I'm like, well, I know what God knows. Isn't that good enough? Right? Isn't that good enough? Right? But this brings us to the fifth step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we have done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. But there is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reason why we should do so, right? So again, remember, I've been talking today about having those blinders on, right? And so it says a solitary self, many of us found that a solitary self-appraisal was insufficient, right? I always like to say that if you and I have a disagreement, there's three things going on. There's my truth, there's your truth, and somewhere in the middle, there's the truth, right? And so when I go through step 4 and I think I understand what my defects of character are, that's a solitary self-appraisal, right? I think that I see the truth, right? But I still see it through the lens of my truth, right? So I might not see the whole picture because I'm focused on, when I'm emotionally attached to things, like I said, I don't see the whole picture, right? And so we think that this solitary self-appraisal is insufficient. So many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reason why we should do so, right? So it's going to tell us why, why it's a good reason to do so, right? It says the best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk, right? So if I don't do it, or if I leave out the things that I most don't want to talk about, I'm almost for certain not going to stay sober, right? Almost for certain. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought that they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought that they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their story, right? All their life story. So I can't say that I've fearlessly gone through with this step if I'm too fearful to share something that's on it, right? So I'm not humbling myself before God if I'm hanging on to these things that I'm too afraid to share, right? If I'm too afraid to get them out. When we talk about things and expose them to the light of day, they lose energy, right? As an alcoholic, when I drank, anything good I did, I made sure everybody knew about it, right? When I was making amends with one of my sisters, she says, "What do you mean you're selfish and self-centered?" She said, "You do all kinds of good things for people. You coach your son's hockey team, you volunteer, you donate money, you do lots of good things." And I'm like, "Yeah," and I make sure every last person knows about it, right? But the darks and so I don't get this wonderful feeling from those things, because as soon as I need to share it with everybody, that's my self-centeredness, right? That's my selfishness. That's me wanting you to think I'm such a good person, right? Because I've got to tell everybody. But then I take the things that that I'm ashamed of, and I stuff them down deep inside, right? And I don't let them see the light of day, right? Everybody understands how blackmail works, right? If you know something about me that I'm so ashamed of anybody else finding out, you can extract money from me. I'm willing to pay you from it, right? How do I get rid of that? There's one simple way. I expose it. If I expose it, you have nothing to hold over me, right? To me, that's how the fifth step works. It works the same way, right? I take away its power when I share it with somebody, right? It no longer has that energy held over me. So, by talking about these things, it bleeds off its energy, right? If you want a good exercise, do something good for somebody secretly and then keep it to yourself. And every time you think about it, you'll glow inside. You'll get a nice warm feeling. It's a good exercise to help me and my selfishness and self-centeredness, right, is to do something good for somebody and then and keep it to myself. Then I'm not doing it for selfish reasons. I'm not hoping to get something out of it, right? And then every time I remember that thing, I get to feel a little bit good inside because it's something that I did for no other reason than for than to help my fellow man, right? So I need to tell all of my life story. So more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. I was like brand new first week or two in AA, no sponsor, no nothing. And I read that paragraph and I highlighted it because that describes me to a T. I understood this paragraph great, right? More than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents the stage character. This is who I want you to think I am. And guess what? I can be in this situation with these people. It might be, work people, and I am going to be this character there, right? And then I might be, with family, and I can be somebody entirely different in who I am there, right? And then I might be out with friends, and I'm somebody very different with those people because I just going to be who I think you want me to be, right? This is the one. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it because I'm pretending, I'm acting, right? I'm not the person that I want you to think I am. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted to certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension. That makes for more drinking. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We have spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. We have seldom told them the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chances for recovery, right? So many of us have sought out professional help, seen psychiatrists, psychologists, medical professionals, and then not told them the truth. Right? We don't tell them the truth about what's really going on. We don't tell them about our alcohol consumption. We don't tell them the truth, and then we wonder why we don't get better, right? So it's like going to a physiotherapist because your knee's bad. He gives you exercises to do. You go back in a week. You can't show him the exercises because you haven't done them, but yet I'm still going to blame that physiotherapist for me not being any better yet, right? Well, that's the exact same way we treat psychologists and psychiatrists is we go there and we don't tell them the truth. We don't tell them what's really going on. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world, right? That's kind of a death threat. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course, will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk to someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. If you cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintances for those close-mouthed, understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. It may be one of our own family. but we cannot disclose anything to our wives or parents which will hurt them and make them unhappy. We have no right to save our own skin at another person's expense. Such parts of our story we tell to someone who will understand, yet be unaffected. The rule is we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others, right? So that paragraph, again, remembering this book was first published in 1939. And that paragraph is, you might be situated where you don't have somebody that you can do your fifth step with, right? That doesn't apply to us in this day and age, right? Back then there was very few meetings, there was very few AAs. We now have meetings everywhere. There's sponsors everywhere. And now we have this wonderful thing called Zoom, right? And so it shouldn't be that difficult to find somebody to accept your fifth step anymore, right? Notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be one is so situated that there is no suitable person available. If that is so, this step may be postponed only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it in the first opportunity. We say this because we are very anxious that we talk to the right person. It is important that we be able to keep a confidence that he fully understand and approve what we are driving at, that he will not try to change our plan, but we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. So again, we're saying it shouldn't be difficult for us to find someone that we could do our fifth step with. When we decide who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory and we are prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we're about to do and we have to and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. They will be honored by our confidence. We pocket our pride, so this is now going to give us the instructions on how to do it. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. These are the fifth step promises, by the way. Our fears will fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And so that's the end of step 5. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about, how we actually receive somebody's step 5 these days. But there's one part. I just like to read this one paragraph on step 5 out of the 12 by 12. And, because we've talked about, I need to do my step 5 with somebody, but this paragraph actually tells me how important it is for me to receive other people's step 5s as well. So I'm just going to read this real quick, and then we'll talk about sort of how we go about doing a step 5. This is on page 57 of the 12 and 12 by 12, and it says, the bottom paragraph says, when we reached AA and for the first time in our lives stood among people who seemed to understand, the sense of belonging was tremendously exciting. We thought the isolation problem had been solved, but we soon discovered that while we weren't alone anymore in a social sense, we still suffered many of the old pangs of anxious apartness. And then this is the key part. Until we had talked with complete candor of our conflicts and had listened to someone else do the same thing, we still didn't belong. Step 5 was the answer. It was the beginning of a true kinship with man and God, right? So until I share my fifth step, until I share my fifth step, and then also receive somebody else's, I'm still not going to be fully integrated with my fellow man, right? So how do we do it? Sorry, I'm kind of rushing because we're running out of time. But so how do we receive someone's fifth step? My technique was when I went and did my first fifth step, and also when I heard many fifth steps, was people tend to start with and they want to test the waters and dip their toe, and we start with something really simple and easy, not one of the big ticket items on my list, and we kind of build up to it, right? And therefore I talk for hours because I'm going through these items, and all these little items, and and it takes hours and hours. And I know when I did my first fifth step, there was one thing on that list that I said, I don't know if I'm even going to share this one or not, this one thing. But if I do, it doesn't matter what else I share. I will have felt I did a thorough fifth step. And yet went on and on for hours about all these, comparatively speaking, really not such consequential items. So you can do it that way, and it's going to take hours and hours and hours. But I don't think that's what the intent was, and especially after understanding what it says in the 12 by 12. So if I'm going to receive someone's fifth step, we'll start with a prayer. And really, I want to make sure that I'm asking God to be His voice, and that He channels, that through me. I want, and so have you. After the prayer, I'm going to look at the guy and I'm going to say, Kate, give me the worst thing on your list. Let's start there. Let's talk about the worst thing on your list. And hopefully he starts with the worst thing on his list. But even if it's the third worst thing on his list, it's a good place to start. And he will share it with me. And I invariably will have something that I did that's, if it's not the exact same, it's very, very similar. And I'll share it with him. And guess what happens? All of a sudden, doesn't feel so all alone. All of a sudden, he doesn't feel the same shame that he felt before. All of a sudden, he knows that he's not alone and that other people have done what he's done, right? And we'll talk about that item back and forth and what it may, what may be. And then when we're done, I will ask him for, what's the next worst thing on your list? And he'll share that with me. And that will, I will have a similar story and I'll share it with him. And we go back and forth like this through all of the biggest items. I'll tell you what I get out of it is that thing that I wasn't sure I was going to share the first time. I've shared it almost every single fifth step since. It's no big deal for me to talk about in the right situation. I'm not going to share it with you people. But in that spiritualness of a fifth step, I've shared it many times since, right? And it's easy for me to share and easy for me to talk about now because it's bled off much of that energy that it used to have when I stuffed it deep down inside and drank about it for decades, right? And so we'll go back and forth for hours. Sorry, not for hours, but a few hours, couple hours maybe, right? And pretty soon you'll find that you're going through these items and you're going through them pretty quick, and eventually you'll just know you're done, right? And you won't have to talk about every line item in his step 4, line by line by line, and he's not putting off the bad things that he doesn't want to talk about. And I tell you, I always share this. The very, very first time I did a fifth step that way, I did it with one of my sponsees, and there was an added benefit to it that I didn't see coming. And because I had it then it becomes a conversation, not really just me hearing what he has to say. And the very, very first time we did it, I did it that way. There was an added benefit that I didn't see coming, and what happened was we did this fifth step. At the end of it, we're going to want to say a prayer again. We're going to thank God, and for being in the room with us and what have you. But early the next day, this man phoned me and he said, I couldn't sleep all night. He says, there's something I didn't tell you. He said, I kept something to myself, and he couldn't sleep. He says, you were so honest with me and you told me everything on your list. You told me your worst things. And all night I laid in bed wide awake. I couldn't sleep because you shared with me and I wasn't completely honest with you. And guess what? He shared, and that's all that really matters, right? And so because I had been honest with him, he had this urge where he had to be honest with me, and it was beautiful. It was this amazing thing. And so and then a fifth step might take 2 or 3 hours instead of 8. I'll be honest, you'll go through it a whole lot quicker if you get the big things out of the way first, right? And so that's how we like to do it. And then at the end, we'll say a prayer. I've always very much, and this comes very naturally. I'm always like, I've gone into some fifth steps going, I don't know how I'm going to do this with this person, and I'm joking, but at the end of it, I always make sure that I tell him what an honor it is for him to have chosen me and to be to trust me. right? To trust me with his deepest, darkest secrets. I tell him that God loves him and I tell him that I love him, and it's so easy to mean it. After you go through a fifth step, give him a big hug and tell him I love him, and tell him God loves him, and it comes and you're done, right? And also the part I forgot is Kevin has a really pointed list of questions at the end that we like to ask as well. I didn't bring the list with me, but I'll just point out some of the questions, and really the point of the questions is it's often some of the things that somebody might be least willing to share, and so we just want to make it as easy as possible for your person to share. And some of the questions are, have you ever physically harmed somebody that we didn't talk about today? Have you ever had an inappropriate sex contact, has whether you're the perpetrator or the whether or as a child been molested or abused. Have you ever killed anybody? And I can't remember the rest of those questions. But the point is, I go into it with those questions prepared and ready, so that I can make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for that person to open up about anything that he might not be willing to talk. We just want to make it as easy as possible. The last thing I'll say about it, and then we'll close, because I'm sorry it is 7:01. And then stick around and we'll hear where everyone's from today. Is that when I'm receiving a fifth step, the last thing I think that you want to do is somebody tell you something and you have a look of shock or horror on your face, right? So we need to remain very neutral. At the opposite end of the scale, and just as important, I sponsored a guy that was a vice president of a big fancy company, and actually has a big fancy government organization in Alberta provincial government. He was a big executive board of director kind of guy on some big Alberta government thing. And we're going through his fifth step, and I was like, when's he going to get to the big stuff, right? But I was like, it's one of those situations where it was, man, I wish I had your problems, right? But the thing you have to remember is you might think that their problems are minor, but to that person, they're everything, right? They're just as important to that person as my worst thing was to me. And so we really have to be neutral, right? And I don't want to look shocked, but I also can't blow off your problems of going, well, geez, that's all you got, right? And so we just really need to be sort of that, and understand that whatever it is, it's the world to that person, right? And it's what they've been stuffing down inside and afraid to talk about, right, for forever. So it's just kind of the demeanor, I guess. And with that, Rob, I think we'll stop. We can say the Lord. We can end with